Laura Madsen is Chief Executive Guru via Gurus and author of Disrupting Data Governance, a call to action. But I'm going to let her provide a better introduction to herself because I'm going to be watching your presentation. Thanks a lot, and take it from here.
All right, thank you. Now, the real question is, guys, can I get my PowerPoint to cooperate with me?
We got a great guy in the back end. He'll help you.
That's always the trick, isn't it? All right, should be good to go. Yes, everyone can see that. So, hello, I am Laura Madsen. I'm not going to give you a better intro because I don't know. I kind of hate all that intro stuff. I've never been very good at that. I do lead a services firm that focuses on data programs in general, and have guilty as charged written a book called Disrupting Data Governance, because for a very long time I felt like data governance in the way that it was constructed in a very traditional way, command and control, was not working for the vast majority of organizations. So that is why I wrote the book, and some of the things that we'll talk about today are based on the content in that book. So I only have 20 minutes, so I'm just going to get right down to it. One of the things that I love to do is just kind of get into the meat of the topic. And, you know, for today, when we think about creating a silver lining from a data governance perspective, and so much of what was just talked about in the panel is really the only way that you're going to get to high quality, context driven, information rich, and, you know, like what other adjectives can I use here? Data environment is really to have people use it. They have to use the data. And it bears repeating because so many organizations and functions of data governance have been, in many respects, built sort of in a contrary way. And it was so much more about that command and control, or about preventing people from using it so that they didn't do dumb stuff. And the reality is that command and control, all it really does is slow down the path of the information to the end user, and actually prevents us from having a responsive and resilient data governance program. And primarily because if people aren't, you know, using it, then you don't know what's happening out there. And when we created data governance functions 20, 30 years ago, it was feasible to have a command and control structure around a 20-table data warehouse, right? It was completely reasonable to expect Laura to know everything about one data table. But in our, I don't know, petabyte universe now, with millions of rows of data coming into most of our data environments at any given moment, it is not feasible to have a command and control. It is not feasible to have one data steward dedicated to a function. And if we can't figure out a way to get people to use that data, there's no way we're going to understand the quality of it. There's the context aspect of it. We have to figure out how to get people to use the data. And I will also say that that's true for every aspect of data programs. And when I say every aspect, I mean everything from data architecture down to data visualization. There is nothing that you should be doing from a data perspective as a program and as a whole that doesn't think about using the data, because it's the only reason we exist. Now, of course, the problem is immediately following that is people are using the data, bad stuff's going to happen. Right? People are going to make mistakes. And we just have to be kind of comfortable with that, and we have to be prepared for that. So really the way to the silver lining is to understand that we have to figure out how to create a data governance function to allow people to actually use that data. And then we're going to have to prepare for the mistakes that happen as a natural part of that. All right. So one of the primary ways that I advocate for this is I make everyone a data steward. Yep, I do. I make everyone a data steward. I literally walk around, well, I used to walk around the hallways and I'd be like, you're a data steward, you're a data steward, you're a data steward. It's not true. I don't do that. And I didn't do that before. But it's more of a philosophical idea, right? So here's the deal. When you create a data governance function that's a command and control buried deep in your IT function, what happens is you have this disconnected view of usage from an average user. But the reality is that they hold all of that information in context. And if you don't hold them accountable for that feedback, then you don't know what you don't know, as that IT person buried deep into an organization that's responsible for data governance. Side note, that's probably not how we should do that, but you know, different topic. Okay. So you have to find a way, right, to create this accountability. If everybody uses the data, everybody has some accountability to use that data. And so what I mean by make everyone a data steward is create a construct in your organization for data governance that if you're looking at something from a data perspective and you're not sure it's right, or you know it's wrong, in that moment, you are a steward of that data. And you create that accountability back to the data, and you create that connection between the data governance, which has always been sort of this nebulous thing, and the person using the data. So in that moment, if you're looking at something that has data on it and you don't think it's right, or you know it's wrong, in that moment you are a data steward. And the only thing as a data governance person that you want them to do is let you know that. That's it. You don't have to, like, you know, indoctrinate them. You don't have to crown them a data steward. You don't have to ask them to do a whole bunch more work for no more money and no more title. You just ask them to give you some feedback. Like, hey, I don't think this is right. Here's what I see. How can I help, right? And if you're going to do this, by the way, you don't make it a big deal. You make it an email. You ask some follow-up questions. But in that moment, what you're doing is you're creating some trust. You're creating a touch point. They're starting to understand that they have accountability back to you in terms of providing some information and some context. And you start to understand and appreciate that all of those people out there that are using the data may very well help you from a data quality perspective, from a data governance perspective, right? So this is what I mean by make everyone a data steward. It is not like everybody's a data steward and now I have 400 people reporting to me. It is literally like I'm a data steward in this moment and I have accountability to my organization to tell people what is wrong and how to fix it. All right, how are we doing? It's so weird. I can't see your faces. I'm just talking to myself in this tiny room, and it's just odd. I don't think I'll ever get used to it. So let's talk a little bit about what happens from a data literacy perspective. And this may feel a little bit like a jump, but it's related. So give me a minute here. So, you know, the interesting thing is people love to think that data literacy and data governance are not related. But I have found that data literacy is actually sort of a bellwether for data governance. So a few years ago, 3 to 5 years ago in the data industry, what happened is data governance had sort of fallen back and people weren't paying that much attention to it anymore. We all sort of had our token data governance leader. Well, we have to do data governance because it's important to protect the data, blah, blah, blah. That person was often buried in IT, different conversation. And then all of a sudden data literacy became sort of the cool thing to do, like, ooh, we should have a data literacy program. And I was guilty of that too, right? So we all created these data literacy programs because everybody needs to be data literate. And they're important, right? Because we do have to train people. We do have to get information out. We do have to train them on the tools that we use and how they should think about data, because there is a lot that's not known. But the problem is, you know, what happens when all of a sudden you have a training system like a data literacy program that starts creating a whole bunch of very, you know, data literate citizen data scientists out in your organization. So let's just pretend you went from 20 people that knew your data really well to 200 in a couple of weeks. What happens? Yeah. I make myself laugh. What happens is you have a whole bunch of people asking a lot more questions that you're not prepared to answer because your data governance person is, you know, buried in IT somewhere. It's one person, right? That's what happened. Like 3 to 5 years ago, data literacy became a big thing. Data governance was sort of in the background. All of a sudden, a whole bunch of questions started happening. This data governance person got completely overwhelmed. And here we're back a little bit like, hey, data governance is actually important. The problem is we do this in so many aspects of our data programs. We do this sort of siloed thing, right? Where we're going to create this data literacy thing over here. And we're going to create this data governance thing over here. And we have this data visualization thing over here. And we have those architects over here because they're really fun to talk to, but wow. And so we put the data architects over here, right? And then we have our data engineers over here. We don't actually want the data architects and the engineers to talk unless we have to. And then we should probably have a mediator in there. We could put a data modeler in there with them. So you see what I'm saying? Like we have all these like silos of functions with data. But the interesting thing is data programs, much like many things in the world and in our lives, is nuanced. And it turns out they're a lot more like an ecosystem than they are anything else. And an ecosystem doesn't have natural boundaries. You don't think a tree is going to just grow by itself, right? It needs the dirt, it needs the water, it needs the air. Okay, so our data is very much like that. And when we create these siloed functions, it actually creates pressure in something else. And it makes our data ecosystem that much more out of equilibrium. By the way, this is one of the reasons why we have the perennial conversation. Where does data go? Should it report to IT? Should it report to the business? If it reports to the business, who should it go to? Product, finance, marketing? I don't know. Where should it go? This is why, because there are no natural boundaries, right? It is an ecosystem, and our data functions are an ecosystem. So when we start to think about data literacy, that is a natural way to think about how you create a whole bunch of very data literate people. It's also how you create a whole bunch of subject matter experts, but you have to have some kind of capability in your data governance side to understand how to account for all of that increase, right? All of these changes that are happening, all of these questions that start popping up. Because the feedback that you get from all of those new subject matter experts that are coming out of your data literacy program will actually only improve your data governance function if you have the ability to take into consideration what they're doing and how they're doing it and the feedback, right, that you get. So but like, Laura, how? I mean, it sounds great. And like, okay, so pretend that I'm going to do this. Okay, pretend that I'm going to disrupt data governance in my company, and I'm going to make everyone a data steward. Like, how? So I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked that question. Okay, so I got into a little rabbit hole with music when I created this slide. And if we were in person, I'd ask, anybody in the audience know what this is from? Because I seriously thought about having like placards that had to meditate, elaborate, recreate, liberate. It's in excess, by the way. Spoiler alert. Anyway, so here's what we do. If you really want to do this, if you really kind of want to start over, if you want to figure out like, how do I create a responsive and resilient data governance function that focuses on usage of data and creates a whole bunch of data savvy people in my organization by partnering with my data literacy function? Okay, the first thing I want you to do is meditate. And I didn't put that there because it rhymed with the others. I actually do want you to take like a minute and think about it and think about your why. Why are you doing this? What makes sense? What does your organization think about this? How would they react? What kind of culture do you live in? Do you live in an organization that is extremely command and control and they're going to throw you out? You know, I mean, if they do, call me. Do you live in an organization that loves to fly by the seat of its pants and they're going to think it's the best thing ever? Think about what and why and how before you start anything, okay? Because you should always start with your why. I didn't come up with that, by the way. And then I want you to elaborate. So this means sit and think about what your organization would do in this space. If you have a data literacy function already, can you attach yourself to that? How would that look and feel? How would you get that feedback in? When you get the feedback, what do you do with it? How far does it go? Who would respond? I want you to elaborate what that program would look like. If you're thinking about data governance strictly from a usage perspective, that's wonderful, but there are other categories that are really important. We all know how important or how broad data governance can be, but you know, we've been focusing on usage because I'm trying to create a silver lining with data savvy people. But there are three other categories that are important from a governance perspective, and that is quality, lineage, and protection. And so this elaboration should include those other categories as well, to make sure that when you think about data governance, you're not forgetting things like privacy by design, which we heard at the panel earlier. So create that happy alliance with your privacy, security, and compliance folks. Make sure that you're not forgetting anything as you elaborate and recreate your new program. And then I want you to start recreating it. And of course, we all start with pilots, these small projects, but maybe you have a small project that's starting and you want to see if this would work. Those are always really great ways to do it, because the fact of the matter is, I can't tell you definitively, hey, if you follow these 10 steps, you're going to be a rock star, right? Maybe it's steps 2, 5, and 7 that's going to make you a rock star. I've tried every iteration to figure out how to be a rock star. I haven't figured it out yet, but every organization is a little bit different. So practicing those things with little pilot projects or proof of concepts to figure out how to make those data literacy connections. When you have people use the data, get that feedback to you, what to do with that feedback, all of those touch points. And then, of course, what do? You liberate your data. Yeah, we talked a year and a half ago, 2 years now, data democratization was a real big thing. I mean, we should do that, but the truth of the matter is, you can democratize your data all you want. You still need really smart people to make data-driven decisions off of it, and there are lots of nuances associated with that. So while I am, sort of pontificating in a 20-some-minute keynote, the reality is there has to be a heavy dose of pragmatism when you actually go to execute these things, because sometimes data governance is your last line of defense. Shouldn't be, but sometimes it is. So as you think about liberating your data, just know that there are other considerations here to be made. But the main thing I want you to keep in mind is if people are using your data and you're taking that feedback, then that's one of the best case scenarios for how to improve. So as we wrap up, there's 3 things I want you to think about. Number 1, I want you to look for champions. I don't care about the naysayers. You're going to have a million of them, right? And if you focus on them, then you're going to lose your champions. You focus on a couple of really great champions. They're smart, they're enthusiastic, they're excited about it. Maybe they don't have any data skills at all. I don't care. I hire for enthusiasm because the rest I can train for, right? So I need you to find your champions. Hopefully they're attached to a great pilot project, and then you get this thing started. Number 2, I want you to prepare. Hey, number 2, gosh, I didn't even plan that, you guys. I need you to prepare for the crap. This is the PG version of that statement, but you know what I'm saying, right? They're going to do dumb things with the data. They're going to ask crazy questions. So you need to be prepared for those kind of pieces of feedback, because the feedback is incredibly important. And I also want you to keep in mind that when people come to you with things, how you respond is very critical, because you're creating a relationship, and you don't want to, if somebody comes to you like, how about I average this mean? Add all these means together, because that helps, right? I can do that, right? No, don't do that. Please don't do that. But if they come to you like that, right, don't be like, God, you're an idiot. Did you not pass Stats 101? If you respond like that, then you've lost somebody forever, right? So how you respond to those cases when people come to you, when they're using the data and they're not sure, and they come to you and they're like, well, I saw this thing and maybe it's not right. You'd be like, hey, thank you, that's awesome. Let's talk about what that means, because that's really important. They're still going to do dumb things, so you need to be prepared for that, and make sure that you have your bases covered. Maybe have that happy alliance with you and your privacy, security, and compliance folks ready. And then I need you to embrace the journey. That's probably some, roomy thing or a Chinese proverb or something like that. But the reality is, if you are working on data governance and you are focusing on usage and people are using the data, those are the main things, because that's why we do anything in data, so people can use the data, right? So if you focus on that usage and you make sure that you are covered on some, prepared for stuff that happens when people give you that feedback, and embrace the journey, then really keeping sort of that just keep swimming aspect of the sustained model for data governance, then you're going to be in good shape. All right, I think I left time for questions. I don't know, I talked really fast.
You left lots of time for questions. You didn't talk that fast. You were good. Oh, so gosh. Yeah, and you weren't alone in the room. We were all sharing a room with you. You just can't see us. There's your Rumi poem for you there in there. So we've got some questions for you. So people were paying attention in there. And I think the good ones, but I'm going to remember that you were a data steward, you were a data steward, you were a data steward forever. So how do you?
Oh, sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, because we want to see you and we can talk. Oh, great. So how do you measure your success, the metrics in governing your data? How do you know you're getting it right? That's a great question.
That is a good question. It's weird. It must be data people on the call.
You think so? Wait, this is a data show? Oh, wait a minute.
Right?
I thought we were talking about music.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, I'm in totally the wrong one. Okay, well, that's a great question. And I think, so let me give you the consultant answer, which is it depends, right? It depends on what you're most keenly interested in for your function. So let's just go back to those 4 categories we talked about, which is usage, quality, protection, and lineage. And when I talk about those, I actually have these categories and I use them in an agile manner. So I think about each task that you do from a data governance perspective should probably align to one of those 4 categories. And in any given sprint or in any given month or quarter, depending on how many of those you do attached to any of those 4 categories is kind of where you should be focusing your time. And that's how you can report those metrics back. So if we're most focused on usage, in other words, we need people using our data, then you could do simple stuff like, well, how many reports were used and how many people access the system. You could also report how many pieces of feedback did you get? We had X number of data quality questions. These, this is what we did. We had 15 people take the data literacy class. This many things came out of that. If you happen to be focusing out of those 4 categories, you happen to be focusing on quality. There's a lot that's been written about data quality, scorecards, and how you make sure that you're representing that data back to your organization when you identify those key data quality metrics. So that's really how I think about that. And those primary data governance metrics that you're working on, they should be as fluid as your organization is. And I think that's a lot of what we forget in data governance is we're trying to sustain these functions. The data governance that we create now is not the data governance in 6 months from now, or it shouldn't be, right? If we're keeping in line with our organization, because no organization is stagnant, which means your metrics should constantly be shifting throughout the tenure of your data governance function.
So usage, quality, what was the other, there was other ones in there? Usage,
quality, protection, and lineage.
And protection and lineage. And that's a great tip for people, in terms of that there are measures out there. My friend Doug Hubbard says that there's people, if you're struggling to measure it, somebody probably already has.
Yeah.
And so, and if taking the good consulting answer is, hey, if you borrow it from another consultant, it's not stealing, so yeah, there you go. Good stuff. So those are good ways to know you're getting it right. I love the fact looking for creative ways of looking at it, because we often don't count the things we do. We have this many people trained. This is, so look around in there. Yeah. How do you establish a clear and strategic hierarchy of accountability for data governance in there? Ooh, yeah.
Oh, a clear and strategic hierarchy for data governance.
Yeah, I think, and you've already talked about, everybody's participates in it, but how do you link the top and the troops? If I hate these phrases, but that's how else do you describe it?
Right. Yeah. The top down, bottom up.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I don't, as you probably guessed from that ecosystem conversation, I don't love hierarchies. I think they kind of force us into a construct that doesn't always work particularly well for the functions that we're trying to achieve. What I will say is if you have everybody being a data steward in that moment when they're looking at something, you do have to have a mechanism for getting that feedback. And if you think about it from a hierarchical perspective, that would all go to a data governance function. Okay. Traditionally, when we build data governance functions in the past, it used to be data governance leader, then we'd have data owners, and then we'd have data stewards. And I think that's probably true still, even if you have sort of make everyone a data steward, right? In that we still want it to flow up through the data governance. The construct of data ownership is important only because We need people making the decisions, and data stewards are often uncomfortable with that. But I don't like data owners in the middle because they often don't really understand the nuances of the data. So when a data steward brings something to you, like I saw this dashboard and it's not right, and they bring something to you. I like this line, this concept of having data first responders in the middle between the data governance person and the data stewards. And they actually vet these questions. Mm-hmm. For many organizations, that's the function of data analysts, right? They get questions in and they're like, oh, I got to figure that out. Or data engineers. And those data first responders actually, really, it's like a triage function. 75% roughly of those things that you get back from people, those everyday data stewards, really aren't that big of a deal. But 25% are kind of a big deal. Those first responders can vet those, triage them, and then get the ones that actually are legitimate challenges on a backlog. So if we're going to create a hierarchy of anything, it's still data stewards at the bottom. You have owners off to the side because they're still important, but their function is really about communication and decision making. And then you have sort of this concept of data first responders, which are probably analysts or engineers that are actually vetting the things that are being brought into from the data stewards.
Yeah, and I think that idea of data ownership is really critical in there. In my experience, anyway, data owners are silos waiting to happen in many cases, and it's just such a mistake as a concept. I don't know if I have a better one, but that's why I was listening so carefully when you were talking about building not a structure, but an environment that we can operate within in there. Good stuff. Yeah. What is the best way to design and deploy a holistic data culture? Oh, I think that's what we're talking about in here. Is there a certain type of training? Oh, that's good. Or upskilling that works best.
Yeah.
So what? Yeah.
Oh, those are good questions. Yeah, so much of what we do is really on culture. When I talked about data cultures like 20 years ago, people thought I was completely nuts. Because we didn't do that back then, right? We worried about the data warehouse and we got to figure out our ETL and blah blah blah. But it didn't go anywhere, right? Because people weren't using the data, or didn't really understand or appreciate how to use the data. So, I think I take a page out of really traditional change management, and there was a moment on this earlier slide that talks about, like, I want you to look for champions. Mm-hmm. And what I care most about is enthusiasm, not skills. So if you happen to find somebody in marketing that loves data but knows nothing about it, who cares? Right? Because that's how you start a data culture. Yeah. And if you have lots of vocal data champions, those naysayers will catch up. So you look for data champions and you figure out how to bring them close, right? That's probably one of the biggest things. You create a data literacy function that helps people understand your data and the function of your data. And if you have a quirky tool or something that you use, then maybe it's tool-based as well, but that's highly dependent. And you just start to, again, thinking about it like an ecosystem, you plant the seed, you feed and water it, and you walk away, right? And then you just keep doing that, and you just keep proliferating all of those things. You absolutely need the skills, right? But you need those enthusiastic champions, and then you just keep going. That's probably the biggest thing that people forget in terms of almost any of this, but certainly culture, which is this is a constant thing. This is a constant thing. People are coming into your organization and leaving all the time. You are never done with this. So create a wiki-like site, put content out there, let people use it. That's the thing, is just anything you can do that will perennially refresh, pushing stuff out to the new people, and as people leave, then retraining. That's probably most of the work, is just that constant reading.
Great. I'm posing great questions, and these are great questions from this audience. This audience is great, and you're on the spot to answer them all. But I think this is a good one to end with, and that's what's one key message for people to take away from your presentation today if they're currently reorganizing their governance strategies? Yeah. I'm going to do my amazing Karnak and steal what I think you're going to say, and I'm going to listen to what you say.
Gosh, the one thing, it's about the people, right? It's about the people, and it's about using the data. there really is nothing else, because nothing else really matters. If you can't figure out how to get people to use the data, right, then there's no value to it to your organization. There's no value to it. Then nobody's going to support you. If nobody's going to support you, they're certainly not going to give you budget. And there's the end of your career at Acme company, right? Nothing else matters. Thank you, Metallica. It's all about the data and the people using it.
And anybody who can end a presentation with a Metallica quote is okay by me. We had a cello player in here. There is a Metallica cello piece too that you got to check out. Just fabulous. So great to meet you, even over this crazy medium, and look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks so much.
Take care. See ya.